But now it's time to go to Sweden, and let's give the web or the floor now to Anna. Anna is with us and will introduce herself now.
Thank you. Let's see. I hope that you can both see me and hear me now. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Anna Karlsson, and I work at an agency under the Ministry of Education in Sweden, and we have a very long name in English. We're called the National Swedish Agency for Higher Vocational Education. You will see that in writing soon enough. The presentation that I'm giving today will first go into trying to describe the Swedish arrangements for validation. And then after a little bit of a break, we will go into more sort of hands-on tools and resources to be used in the work with validation. So with that very short introduction, I'll see if I can start. So as I said, the Swedish National Agency for Higher Vocational Education, and I'm just going to very, very briefly tell you a few words about us. As I said, we are an agency under the Ministry of Education and Research, and we were established in 2009. And we have been working with validation of prior learning in different ways since 2009. We have 2 offices. Our headquarters is in Västerås, where I am today, and Västerås is just about an hour with the train west of Stockholm. And we also have an office in the south of Sweden. Our Director General is Thomas Persson, and we're about 125 employees. We're growing at the moment, so I'm not 100% sure about that number, but it's somewhere around there. And for those of you who want to learn a little bit more about us, you can visit our website. You see the address there. Our areas of responsibility is, as our name gives away, we are responsible for the system Higher Vocational Education in Sweden. This is, I'd say, the biggest task we have, at least the task that draws the most of our resources. We are also responsible for 2 other forms of post-secondary education in Sweden. So it's post-secondary arts and culture courses, and also interpretation courses and programs. This we're not going to talk that much about today. I'm going to go in more to the responsibilities that we have when it comes to, of course, validation, and a little bit in connection to that too, that we are responsible for the Swedish National Qualification Framework, and that we also is the national coordination point for the European Qualification Framework, the EQF. So these are the different things that we work with here, and I've worked here since the start with a few years also working for the EU with these issues, the task that we had and the responsibility that we've had over the years when it comes to validation has differed a little bit, but I'll tell you a little bit more about that when I tell you about the Swedish system. So with that very short introduction to where I work and our agency, I am going to try to describe to you the Swedish arrangements for validation. And it's not very easy because it's a complex system that's very diverse. So I'll do my best to try to pinpoint the sort of very basic features and the most important features in this. The first thing that needs to be said when it comes to validation in Sweden is that we can describe it as having a dual system when it comes to provision of validation. We have, there's possibilities for validation within the education system, but there is also a parallel system where our employee and employer organization and the social partners, they also work with validation. So we have a system of validation within working life that is parallel with the one of the education system. And you see that I've put the question, why is it like this? And this is one of those important features when it comes to Sweden. This is mainly due to the fact that our labor market is governed through or by the social partners through the collective bargaining and the collective agreements. So this means that there are very few regulated professions in Sweden. So there are very few professions where you actually need a specific qualification from the education system to be able to be employed. It is up to the employers, and it is up to what's been agreed in the collective agreements, and they can basically hire anyone they want, with very few exceptions when it comes to really regulated professions. So this is why we've, since the mid-90s, I'd say, we've had this development of these two parallel systems. And I will get back to what this, what kind of challenges this creates for us a little bit later. Another basic features of validation arrangements in Sweden is, of course, that it's a very decentralized system, very much so when it comes to the provision of validation, the providers that are actually doing the validation and meeting the individuals. There are many different actors involved in that. Different schools at municipal levels, different sector industry organizations, the university and the university colleges, and et cetera, et cetera. So this is also one of the very basic features. And another thing then that is not validation in itself, but specific for I'd say the whole of the Swedish education system, is that it's also have a very semi-decentralized governance, which means that there are very many different national agencies and actors involved in this. And I earlier today, I tried to make a sort of a head count, and I could have missed some. But when I tried to really see how many national agencies are actually involved in this in some capacity, I reached the number of 10 to 12. And then to add to that, we also have our 21 regions that has responsibility to sort of coordinate this work at regional level. So apart from the fact that there are many providers, decentralized provision, there is also very many actors involved in this system from a sort of a governance perspective. Another important feature is that there is no general legal base that covers all of validation, but rather validation, or perhaps not even validation itself, but the right to have your prior learning assessed and valued for different purposes. That is regulated, but it's then regulated in these sort of subsystems of the education system. So I'm going to go into and show you a little bit more about that also later. Another thing I realized that I also should mention is that the principle of who's paying for validation in Sweden follows also the general principle of our education system. And education is free of charge for the individual in Sweden, all the way up, including higher academic education. And that principle is the same for validation, with some sort of exceptions or possibilities for individuals that actually would want to pay for it themselves to do so. But the main principle is that there is no fees for individuals who want to have their prior learning assessed and recognized. So, talking about this dual system, I will firstly, I hope this is somewhat visible to you. There's little text, but I think we can see it. So this is a sort of a visualization of the Swedish education system. And I wanted to use this image to show you where the validation of prior learning is a possibility for individuals. First of all, it's a possibility within the municipal adult education. Municipal adult education are for people that have left upper secondary school, but who wants to go back to perhaps finish getting their grades in specific subjects, or going back to study vocational programs, etc. So the municipal adult education mainly delivers the same content as upper secondary school, the Swedish gymnasium, does, but it's for adults. And the responsibility for this is, of course, the municipalities, which we have about, 291, I think, in Sweden. And this is where I'd say the bulk of validation in Sweden is actually happening. And there are different possibilities there. The second main part in the education system where validation actually is a possibility is within higher vocational education, so the system that we ourselves are responsible for, and then also in university and at university colleges. Then, as I think many of you perhaps know, we also have a rather large sort of third sector education, which is the folk high schools. And validation also takes place there, but I wouldn't say that it's a mainstream when it comes to arrangements and governance and legal basis for it, as in the other three parts of this. So within the education system, this part, there are two main purposes to use validation. The first one is for access to further training. So there is a right for individuals who don't meet the formal requirement for access to both higher vet or higher education at university to have their prior learning assessed for the purpose of access. This has been in place for quite some time and works, I'd say, rather well. For instance, for the higher vet system, we know that there are approximately 13% of those who apply that actually get access based on their prior learning. So that is a good number, I'd say. And the other purpose for validation within the education system is for what we usually call exemptions, which means that you, once you're in the system itself, you can ask to have your prior learning assessed, to not have to study parts of programs and courses that you already actually have the skills or competences for. This system, I think, needs to be strengthened, but it's also the regulations for this has been in place for quite some time. And this is possible then both within the municipal adult education system, within higher vet, within interpretation courses and programs, some parts of it at least, and also within higher education again. The main challenge, I'd say, for this is to be able to, after the validation process, when you sort of identified gaps of an individual, and then you need to sort of give them complementary training for those identified gaps. I think the link between the validation process and that sort of complementary training needs to be strengthened. So this is also one of the challenges I think we have for this. So that's validation within the education system. And then we have this other part, the other parallel for this, which is validation within working life, that we call in Swedish branschvalidering. So branch organizations or industry sector organizations that are interested in validation for different purposes have, during quite some time now, since I think mid-90s as well, developed different validation models for their sector. At the moment, I'd say that there are about 25 of those models that encompasses about 60 vocations that are up and running where validation is actually happening right now. And you see some of the examples of these validation models within the different areas, different sectors where this is actually taking place. Within our technical industry, our industry for sort of producing different goods and etc. That's where the process industry, that's where I think the main bulk of this is actually happening. Because they sort of, in the last couple of years, they've really understood the value of using validation for competence development purposes, for recruitment, etc. So these sectors, their main interest in this and their main drive for doing this is that they see validation as a tool that will enhance the quality in their recruitment processes. It gives them a possibility to work with gap analysis, to do more strategic competence planning and development plans for their companies as well as for their employees. We can also, apart from that, see that these models enhance matching in the labor market. And they have been used during the last, let's say, 10 years, I'd say, for unemployed people and in different types of projects for newly arrived immigrants. And that has mainly been the responsibility of our public employment services to use these models for those target groups. We've tried to get some numbers about how many people actually are validated according to these models. And the numbers are not 100%. But we can see, and I realize that I think I probably actually put the wrong number in the slide, because I think it should be slightly more than 15,000. But let's say I think it's around 18,000 people that have been validated from 2015 up to the end of 2018 with these models. So it's not perhaps that many, but we're not a big country, so it's still a good amount of individuals that actually benefits from this. These models of validation, the qualifications that they actually lead to are mainly today level 4 qualifications. And there is only one of them that actually already have been placed in our national qualification framework. But this is what we do at the moment. This is what we're trying to achieve, to create that link between the validation arrangements and the qualification framework, to sort of strengthen that link and create synergies between those two. So this is a very short overview of the Swedish arrangements for validation. And as I said, this of course, this way of arranging this, of course, brings both good things and perhaps a few more challenging things. The good thing about the decentralized system is that it creates a higher level of availability where people actually are. The fact that it's a possibility within the municipal adult education means that it comes very close to people throughout Sweden. The backside of that, I would say, is the fact that we really need to get better at equal application of rules and equal access for people, and the fact that someone validated within one municipality in Sweden, that result needs to be made valid throughout all of the country. So these are a few of the challenges. In 2017, there was a proposal for a national strategy delivered to the government. And that strategy identified a couple of priorities for further developments. And those priorities are the ones you see here. So we talk about transferability between qualifications. This is very much trying to bring these two parallel systems, this dual system, bring it together so that if you as an individual have your skills validated within education, the education system, that also will be recognized by the sectors in the labor market and vice versa. So this is one of the important things that we are now working with. This is definitely a challenge also for us. And this is where we see the Swedish qualification framework as a possible bridge between these two. So we are now very intensely working with bringing these qualifications from the sectors into the national qualification framework to be able to create this transferability. As I said in the beginning, there are very many actors, both on provider level, those doing the validation, and those sort of responsible for it, are very many. So the division of roles and responsibility is also very important. So this is also a priority. It needs to be made clear. It needs to be communicated who is actually doing what and who is responsible for what. And this is something that we also very much are working with continuously. And this, of course, is not only all the actors involved in the system, but this is also an issue, I'd say, for our government to be able to sort of steer all these actors that are involved so that they work together and so that the work being done and the developments being done are coordinated. As I said a little bit, with that many actors involved, quality will of course be a challenge. So high quality or enhancing quality is also one of the priorities in the national strategy. This is very important for individuals so that they have equal opportunities and that the rules are applied equally for all those individuals actually going into this. So this is also something that we work with. Resources and organization. This is one of the priorities, and I think one of the main issues when it comes to resources and organization is that we need better systems for financing validation. We need a good sort of set of structures around this so that validation is worthwhile for both providers and for individuals to go into that. And finally, we see that one of the priorities is information and guidance. The link to guidance is something that needs to be developed. And when you have this type of very decentralized system, information is crucial for individuals to actually find their way in this system. So I'd say these are both the priorities and they sort of mirror the fact that these areas are also the main challenges that we have here in Sweden when it comes to our different validation arrangements. So I will stop there for this first part about the Swedish system.
Thank you very much, Anna. It was a very nice overview about the system in general, and I think we found quite a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences as well about comparing to Estonian. But now we will give the floor for a short comment to Ernesto. Ernesto is working as a ZFOP expert, and Ernesto will comment a little bit this Swedish case in relation to European approaches to RPL. So what are your comments when you come to that system in general and you look the general developments from the distance?
Hello, good morning everyone. Thank you for inviting me and thank you for organizing this webinar. I find them very interesting. I was already in the previous one. And thank you, Anna, for a very interesting presentation of the Swedish case. I'm glad to see you. I was hoping to see you in person at some point, but let's hope soon.
Happy to see you too, Ernesto.
I just wanted to, well, first maybe a little bit about who I am for those that don't know ZFOP. So I'm an expert at ZFOP, the Center for the Development of Vocational Training. It's a decentralized agency of the European Commission, and we are mainly helping the Commission and other governments, countries in different areas on education and training. And I am responsible for validation of non-formal and informal learning. So we work together with the Commission in the development of the European Inventory on Validation. We have produced the European guidelines on validation that they talk about in the previous webinar. I put in the chat the link in case some of you might not know it. What I wanted to do very briefly basically is to kind of put in perspective what Anna has presented, how the Swedish case has certain particularities that I think are important to highlight. And maybe Anna, you can comment on them if you want, or what you think about it. But the first thing I think it's important to take into account when thinking about the Swedish case is that in Sweden really has a long tradition since the 90s already, with the reform of the adult education system. In a way, validation or acceptance of the principles of validation were there. So I always feel that the Swedish system validation is very much embedded in the different processes. As Anna has shown, in a way, it is very fragmented, but it is there. It's something that it is available for people to be used, even if fragmented. And I think they are doing a very big effort now in trying to create this coherent, coordinated way of approaching validation, because it has grown, let's say, organically within each of these fragments that Anna was referring to. So I think that it's important to take into account that really the Swedish, in general, Swedish society also is very much a lifelong learning place in a way. People, we see it all in the statistics. Sweden is always among the highest in the rate of participation in adult learning. So there is this culture, let's say, this embeddedness of learning constantly all across your life. And in that way, people are used to come in and out of education at different times in life. And so that's the first thing. The second thing, and this maybe Anna, you can comment on, I think that also one of the advantages that the Swedish system has is that learning outcomes approach has been now there for quite a while. I remember when I was in Sweden in the year 1999-2000 doing my PhD, working with the professors at higher education institutions, actually developing learning outcomes approach within the changes to the Bologna process and stuff. So it's something that is also crucial, and I think that this we cannot forget, that it's a fundamental aspect of validation. We need this learning outcomes approach in a way that we describe qualifications. And a third point, and with this I finish my 5 minutes, I think that you have mentioned it a little bit, Anna. I think that in Sweden, one of the key issues is that the individual really is at the center of the validation process. At least it tries to be. I think we have to remind ourselves, we that are developing policies on this, is that these processes of validations are really for people that are trying to find out what their skills are, trying to use these skills. And in that sense, I think that the Swedish case, having this decentralized system that can really meet the needs of the individuals at the place they live and where the specificities that they have is very important. So these three things I thought are an interesting highlights for the validation in Sweden. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ernesto, for those comments. So, but now back to Sweden again, and Anna, the floor is yours again.
Thank you. Well, before we go into the second part of my presentation, I'll say a few words on in regards to Ernesto's comments. I think you sort of describe what's going on in Sweden in a very in a very good way. We have a long tradition. It is very embedded in in other systems, in other parts of education system. But as you say, it is also fragmented, and coherence is one of the main issues that we're actually working on and have been for quite some time. So I totally agree with everything you said there. And as you say, I do think that we have, since this reform of the adult education system in the mid-90s, I think that has been one of the strong parts when it comes to lifelong learning, because more or less that means that there are no dead ends for people. You can go back into education system if you didn't finish upper secondary school. You can go back when you're 45, when you're 50, when you're 55, and you have the possibility of sort of reskilling within that system in a very good way. I mean, it's not perfect, and we still need to develop it, I'd say, but it is there, and I think it's operating, in my experience, in a very good way if you compare to many other countries that perhaps not has this very long-standing tradition of working with adult education in the same way. But I'd say it's quite similar in all the Nordic countries when it comes to this tradition. So it's not something that's very specific for Sweden in that regard. I think it's more of a Nordic thing. You also mentioned learning outcomes, and I agree with you. This is one of the most crucial factors to enhance quality in validation, and to make it very clear for everyone what is actually being validated, what is being assessed. And I think it's difficult when you're on the inside and looking out sometimes, because I think maybe when you're as in Ernesto's position outside and looking in, you think this looks really good because you have a competence-based sort of education system. You use learning outcomes to a great extent within the education system. But from our perspective, since the last couple of years working with the Swedish qualification framework, it's very clear to us that we still have a lot of work to do when it comes to learning outcomes, both within the education system, but also when it comes to the sectors and the sort of non-formal qualifications from the industry sectors. But the good thing about this, and the good thing is about that our working life organizations, the social partners are very involved, etc., is the fact that they see the value of using learning outcomes and using the Swedish qualification framework for this, for actually enhancing the quality of this. So I think you're right, Ernesto. We have come some way when it comes to learning outcomes and the use of learning outcomes, but we do still have a way to go. And one of the things that we as an organization work very much with right now, and I know that one of my colleagues that is in charge of that project, Heleriin, is with us in this seminar, that what we're trying to do now is to support the sectors very much when it comes to their capacity of designing their qualifications and using learning outcomes. So this is very much something that's going on at the moment. And yes, I think we try to keep the individual at the center. So I also think that's one of the strong things about these arrangements in Sweden, where it's set up and where it's actually accessible for individuals for different purposes at different times in their lifelong learning journey. But then again, in the last couple of years, there has been a shift towards it more being about labor market needs. So I have to say that I'm a little bit concerned about this shift. It perhaps is much more of a sort of shift in narrative, the way we talk about it, and maybe not as much a shift in how we're doing it. But it's still something to keep in mind, that you need to keep this balance between the individual needs and interests and rights and the need of the labor market. So I think this is one of the important things going forward. With that said, now time flies, but I wanted to show you a few resources for actually working with validation. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen again. here we are. So I wanted to give you a few examples for specifically tools for mapping of skills and assessment of skills. We usually sort of divide the validation process in those two main processes. So competence mapping and competence assessment, or mapping of skills and assessment of skills. So this is what I wanted to show you a few examples of. Those of you interested in the presentation that I think the organizers will share with you afterwards, there are links to all these examples, so you can find them and go in and have a look at them a little bit more in detail if you want to. The first thing I wanted to show you, and I had hoped that it would be published by today, but it wasn't, so I can't show it to you online, is that we've been working the last year with quality audit criteria and a provider self-assessment tool for our providers in the higher vet system. So when they work with validation, both for the purpose of access to the programs and for exemption within the programs, we now have quality audit criteria, and we have a self-assessment tool for those providers to work with their quality enhancement. The criteria and the self-assessment system is based on something that was developed a couple of years ago within the Nordic Network for Adult Learning that has an expert network for validation, and it's called the Nordic Quality Model. And you can find the links to that if you want to look at the model. But the model contains, you see, as Ernesto pointed out, the individual incentives and different parts of then the validation sort of arrangements that needs to be quality checked, let's say. These criteria, there's a set of 4 main criteria, and under each one of those criteria, there's a set of indicators. And now you see an image with the Swedish texts, so you can't read that, but anyway. So these 4 main criteria is divided into these parts. So it's about information and guidance, it's about mapping of prior learning or skills, and it's about assessment of prior learning or skills, and it's about the provider's own systematic quality work or quality assurance work. So this is one, and this self-assessment tool for the providers aims at helping them to identify strong points and weak points and where they need to further develop their work with this. There are, for instance, indicators within this that is about the people doing both mapping and assessment, so their skills and their competences, the assessors, etc. So, for instance, there are a few indicators on those parts in this. We also have a very similar tool that is for the industry sector organizations working with validation. We call this the Quality Compass. And this is more or less the same kind of tool as the one I just talked about, but this is then aimed at specifically at these sectors working with validation. And this tool is based on guidelines and recommendations that we developed together with them in 2015 and 2016. And this is an online tool to do also that self-assessment. What do we need to do to be able to develop our validation model within our sector? So this tool is also now being put to the test, and let's see if it will work as an online tool. I will show you just quickly in a minute. Then I wanted to just, these are the 2 tools that my agency is working with and that we have developed together for the purposes of the parts of the system that we are responsible for. But there are, of course, other tools developed for other parts of the systems. What we're doing right now, part of this coherence work that we're doing, is the fact that we have now collected and tries to present all these different tools together at our website. So the first link here is to that part of our website where these tools and resources are presented. I also wanted to highlight to you today that our public employment services, together with both sectors and other actors, they have developed a set of self-assessment tools for individuals going into validation. I will show you an example of that. They have been translated into several different languages, so they are available for people coming to Sweden from other parts of the world. There is, since a couple of years ago, there is an open online course for competence development of those working with validation, so for the assessors, etc. This has been developed by our sister agency, the National Agency of Education. And we also present and work a lot with, again, another Nordic tool, the Nordic competence profiles for validation professionals. And then finally, I also wanted to give you another Nordic resource, which is called ValiGuide, that also NVL, the Nordic Network for Adult Learning, has developed, where tools from the different Nordic countries are presented. And I'm pretty sure that Fjóla will perhaps say something about this when you go to Iceland in your next webinar. So these were the ones that I quickly wanted to say something about. And I will now go to just show you a few of these. So the first one, this is the web page for our public employment services, where you can find these self-assessment tools, and you'll see there's a long list here of different, and then you can change to the different languages, and you see that there are a few there. And I prepared by opening one. So this is the self-assessment tool for individuals considering going into the construction sector. So this document they can use to assess their own experience. And the self-assessment is built up with 5 different sort of, a scale of 5 from no experience to substantial experience within the area. And then when you scroll down, you found the self-assessment questions. So personal characteristics, the experience within the sector. So you see experience of working in demolition, in renovation, as a carpenter, as a bricklayer, etc., etc. So this is a way for the public employment services officers that meet individuals to use this tool to sort of identify and look at if this individual has enough experience to actually go further on in the validation process within a specific sector or for a specific vocation. So that's one of the tools that has been developed. And then let me see. So no, wrong one. Well, this is the link for the NVL, and this is the link to these competence profiles for validation practitioners. But this is the one for the open online course. Unfortunately, it's only available in Swedish, but this is a way for anyone working with validation to be able to register and go through this course. This course also can be followed up by a academic course in university that the Agency for Education and the government pays for those professionals who want to apply. And it's been given in a couple of rounds, and I think it will be again at Linköping University in the fall. So I see that the clock is ticking, so I'm going to stop there, but you can have a look at my presentation and the links in there, and you can have a look for yourself and take a look around at the different tools that are actually available. And I say that the last thing I'll say about this is I think one of the challenges that has been discussed is that we don't have enough tools to do validation. And we say, no, there are plenty of tools, you just need to find them. So I think that's a challenge of actually presenting them in a way so the people out there working with this actually can find them. So this is why we're trying to sort of collect them and present them in one place now.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for your presentation and sharing your experiences and bringing us to Sweden. And I totally agree that it's not just about that there are not methods. I think it's also about that you just have to start to use them, because it's always hard to begin with. But I think we have to just experience it. Otherwise, we can't develop a validation system. But it's right now it's just us. But if somebody is in the video, then please join us to give a big applause for Anna. So thank you again. Yeah. You mentioned, Anna, that there are many actors involved in the validation system, and it's a decentralized system. And also there might be problems with whether the access is equal in everywhere. So I was wondering, are you or how are you holding them together, all the different actors? Are there some kind of networking activities?
I mean, this has been done differently throughout the years. We've had a few different. We had the first governmentally appointed validation commission in 2004 to 2007 with the task of sort of coordinating this. After then, our agency got the task of coordinating this in 2009 until I think 2015. Then we had a second national committee for validation that the government appointed, and they finished their job in the end of last year, and then it came back to us again. So at the moment, it's part of our responsibility to actually try to coordinate the developments within all these different systems. Or subsystems. It's not an easy task, I can assure you that. And we'll see, because also this second validation commission that just ended their work now, they've made a lot of proposals to the government on how to go ahead, where this type of coordination is one of these issues. So for now, for this year, we have that task of actually trying to coordinate it, and then we'll see what the government will decide further on. But I do think there is a need for someone who has the responsibility of being that glue in this. But it's also important that all others also have similar responsibilities to actually be part of that coordination.
Thank you. For sure, it's not an easy task to do, but we wish you all the luck with that.
Thank you.